Hello, and welcome to the weekly philosophy chat on Hello Philo. Do you ever feel like life is one big hamster wheel that we're at least somewhat aware of, but we can't jump off of? Well, today we'll be discussing the myth of Sisyphus, why it's relevant to all of us today, and we'll be talking about key moments in the story and how they relate to us all as we talk about free will, meaning, and acceptance. So let's jump right in. I'm Claire Foster, and I'm joined today by Dotan Russo.
Hi, Claire.
Hi,
Good
thanks
to
for
be here, as
joining.
always.
So glad to have you. Um, so first, I'm wondering if it might be helpful to give our viewers a brief overview of what the myth of Sisyphus is. So I'll just quickly share. So it is an ancient Greek story. Now, Sisyphus was a human. He was not a god, but he was a human, a man who was very intelligent, according to reports, very cunning, and he chose to try to outwit the gods on a number of occasions, and he successfully did so. He outwitted a number of different gods, including Zeus, in a number of different ways, and finally, this all caught up to him, and he was condemned to an eternal fate in Tartarus, which is the cosmic realm below the underworld, if it could possibly get worse. And he was condemned to a very specific fate, which was to push an enormous boulder up a hill, only to go up the hill to watch it roll back down again. And he would have to go back down and then push it up once more, only again to watch it roll down over and over for eternity. And this was his punishment. I think it's important to note that at the time, ancient Greeks found this story to be more of a cautionary tale, and I'm not sure how if they looked into it metaphorically as we're going to be talking about, but it was really a cautionary tale of using one's intellect, one's human intellect, to sort of outfox the natural order of the world. And when you do that, there can be dire consequences, which is, I think, is kind of an interesting note as we talk about the order of things and whether that even exists. So that is the brief synopsis of Sisyphus. And so I am curious to ask you if you relate to this story, how do you relate to this story in your modern life?
Well, I think the fact that we're discussing this myth more than 2,000 years after it was invented speaks volume. And a reason for this is that many would argue that the Sisyphus myth is actually a very good, strong illustration of the human condition. Because Sisyphus was condemned to push this rock over the hill again and again, never reaching the end, which appeared to be a meaningless task. A lot of effort is being put in something which does not end with any meaningful results. And when we observe our own lives, there's many similarities. You know, we live in circles. We wake up in the morning to do the same ritual, the same things. We have a certain, purpose. We are achieving it just to replace it with another one. And so many tasks. If you stop someone in the street in the middle of the day, his mental condition is a constant struggle towards somewhere and this or something. And this seems like a never-ending repetitions, which also include suffer and difficulties, alongside, of course, with good moments and happiness and so on. So I think on the very basic level, it is very convincing to argue that the Sisyphus myth actually fits very well the human condition, and that is why we're discussing it now.
Yeah, I think so. But I also think it would be we can't ignore the idea of hope, hope for change. So that's one thing I want to talk about because certainly I think we do feel like we're on a bit of a hamster wheel, like we're pushing that rock up every day. But I think we do try to hold on to hope that there could be change in the future. So I want to ask you, well, I'll ask you about that first. Do you feel like there is room for hope to change circumstances, or is that a dangerous thing is that a dangerous narrative to have?
Well, circumstances obviously are being changed, right? Constantly. Our life is not stable. However, what many people discover is that regardless of the circumstances, they end up in a very similar position, at least in their psychological state. So one can be a poor student, struggle to get his grades, and have a certain mental position of anxiety and struggle and difficulties and so on. And 30 years later, he's already a rich man, successful person, but he's still under the same mental psychological condition. So the issue here is not so much necessarily about the external factors, but also, or maybe even mainly, about the internal ones. Now, the hope obviously is something which is crucial because it provides us with this more optimistic vision of our own future. But one should ask to what degree this hope actually is being fulfilled. And if we consider the Sisyphus, as we mentioned, to be a good parallel of human condition, then the question, the first, the very basic philosophical question would be if this life is worth living. And on this, I would like to get your input. Is it worth living?
Yes, I think life is worth living. I think that suffering is inevitable, and I think that, the relative degrees of suffering, I mean, that varies, of course, across the individual. But I can't help but think of Viktor Frankl in this conversation. In terms of a life worth living, Viktor Frankl is a Holocaust survivor, but he wrote Man's Search for Meaning, which I know you're familiar with, and I'm sure others are as well. And he talked at length. I mean, his circumstances couldn't have been more dire in concentration camps with people around him starving and dying. And he talked about the idea that suffering is not inherently meaningful. And I think we could apply that logic in general, which I would agree with, that perhaps life is not inherently meaningful. But his point was that there is no inherent meaning in the suffering, but you can extract meaning from suffering. But it's not a given, it's very much a choice. And so, in that sense, I think for me, and I think for Frankel as well, every day is a choice. You will come across the good things and you'll come across the bad things, and you will feel pain and you'll experience suffering and you'll experience loss as well as all the good things. But I think it's very much a choice to extract meaning where perhaps it doesn't inherently exist. And I think Frankel would say that there's plenty of needless suffering, and I agree. So to make that choice, to make your own suffering meaning, to find it through, to create meaning through suffering, is something that you can do, but it's on you to do it.
Well, Franken, as you rightfully stated, is emphasizing that while we cannot necessarily change the external life circumstances, we do have the freedom to regarding the way we address those circumstances. Our attitude is something which is in our own hands. But I think that, the myth of Sisyphus has all sorts of dimensions and it can be understood in very different ways. For example, the first, or the trivial, the literal meaning is that Sisyphus was condemned, was punished to push this rock upon the hill. So those external circumstances were forced on him. But there's also another version of this, and that is that it's not only about the external, it's also about the internal, which basically means that also our characteristics, our character, our tendencies, our also are being forced on us. We don't choose to be the person we are, right? Just like we don't choose our eye color, we don't necessarily choose our tendencies. If you would stop a person and ask him to write down 100 things that he dislikes about himself, almost everyone would be able to do so, right, on different level. And then you would ask, okay, so why don't you change them? And the trivial answer would be, well, it's not up to me. I've been trying, I've been doing this or that, but at the end of the day, I'm stuck with this. Now, this is something that not only 20 years old would say to you, even 80 years old people would say to you. And this may suggest that also our internal world, internal personality is forced on us. And if that is the case, then the Sisyphus should be understood also as a suffer which is caused by the same versions of ourselves that we keep on experiencing. Now, if that is the case, then changing our attitude towards our circumstances is not necessarily something which is in our hands.
So I happen to totally disagree. I think there are circumstances where it may be very challenging physically in the cases of addiction, for example. But I think that I go back to a phrase that I think of almost every single day. My husband's grandfather said it. I don't know if he coined it or where he got it from, but I think of it every single day. And that is the phrase that you do what you want to do. We create narratives in our minds for everything. I don't want to go, I don't have time to go to the gym. I really need to get stronger, but I don't really have time to go to the gym. Or whatever is happening in your life, you're making excuses for it. It's because you don't want to do it. It's a story that you tell in your own mind. And I think about what the Zen Buddhists would say, which is that there's some element in your life, some suffering, some emotion, some feeling that you have, and immediately your mind takes over and creates a story about it. And it decides that this is annoying, or I don't like this, or I don't have time
But the
for
question
this.
here is to what degree you have freedom to impact or to change this brain mechanism. That's exactly the question. To what degree you have the freedom? And one would say if it was truly in our hands, why are we still left with this list of 100 things that we would like to change about ourselves? We would
Well,
just change them.
yeah, well, I didn't say it was easy, and I don't think most people can, and I'm not sure I'm any expert on the matter either. I try to change things, and you have to challenge yourself. That's the whole idea of self-interrogation, of sort of stepping above your own thought processes and thinking, well, why am I doing this over and over again? I do believe it's within your control. I think it's very difficult to do it because you have to recognize the patterning in your brain that tells you and creates that story over and over, and instead sort of sit in that present moment, which cuts through those stories that your brain is trying to tell you. I do think it's possible. I think it's extraordinarily difficult.
But reflection doesn't necessarily mean control. It's not equal to, you can be reflective about yourself. You can acknowledge certain things. You can hope to change them. But the question whether you actually have the power to do so is a completely different question. Now, people would obviously say, of course we can change. We are changing. But the fact that we are changing doesn't necessarily prove that we have control over our own change or development of our personality. It just might be an outcome of internal mechanism which is forced on us the change as well, right? And I think just the fact that many people, most people, would identify or would identify with which I just said that there are many things about their personality, their characteristics, their tendency, the kind of glasses that they're wearing when they see the world, that they would much like to be different, and yet they are stuck with it. Speak volume about this. Think of jealous people. They would prefer not to be jealous. Still, they are jealous, and some of them are born this way, and they die this way. People who lose their temperature easily, people who are tend to pessimism, right? So if we go back to Sisyphus, this is a more deep layer of understanding this myth, and that is that there's no way out of this punishment. Because even it's not just about the external circumstances that we have limited control over, but it's also about our internal world, right? To a high degree, we're stuck with what we are. And of course, if we go back to the Sisyphus circumstances, right, of one that may appear to be so meaningless. Um, to what degree do you find that this is a coherent description of our own life? Maybe it's not. Maybe the premise is wrong.
Um, I I mean, I think it's also in how you interpret it, right? Like going back to what we were just talking about, how you interpret the choice, right? So Camus, for example, as we've talked about before, went on at length in his own story, The Myth of Sisyphus, about a number of parts relating to the story, but sort of most famously that moment where he is at the top of the hill and he watches that rock roll down, the boulder roll down, and though it's not actually a choice in his fate, it is in a sense, and he watches it, and he walks back down, and he moves those legs to get back down the hill, and so in that sense, I think it does represent it could represent our lives, but so does the choice. And I got to go back to, the examples that you just used about being sort of a naturally jealous person or whatever. I have to just sort of say one more thing about this. Sorry. That I do think those qualities, though, I think traditionally thought of as inherent or something that you're potentially born with. I don't know if that's true. I think those are things you can absolutely work on. I don't think those things are, I think they feel wired and they feel baked, but I do not feel that they cannot be worked on. I do not think that through different means, through meditation, through self-interrogation, therapy, I mean, there are a million different ways to slice it, that someone is jealous in a permanently. I think jealousy is a reflection of some sort of something that you're missing inside, something that can be filled in another way that would minimize, mitigate, even erase jealous feelings towards someone else. So, just to sort of clarify that point, I think that we are capable of change. And to answer your most recent question, I do think that it is representative of our lives, but in the interpretation that is very much individual.
So just to clarify, I'm not stating that the internal world is necessarily giving, right? And we stuck with it. I bring it as a question, as a possible also another way of understanding the myth and trying to correlate it with the human condition. Also, I would argue that there are different layers, right? There are certain aspects of our personality which are very fundamental to our personality. Those things would be much harder to change, and of course, there are other things which are more on the surface that can be changed easier. Now, this is left to each one to decide, to give his own verdict, whether to what degree we can actually change ourselves, while reminding ourselves that the fact that we are changing by itself, which is under no dispute, doesn't necessarily means that we have the control to change ourselves. Things are changing in the external reality, internal reality. It might be part of this mechanism. Now, if you go back to the myth itself, again, there are different layers that we can take from this. And one may ask, okay, so we look at Sisyphus and it seems like he's suffering, but if we try to break it down and to really figure out to ourselves what are the reasons there that or the causes for his suffer that can correlate to our own lives. And I think there are a few. One of them is predictability. Sisyphus, what is so awful about Sisyphus' punishment is that everything is so predictable. This is an endless circle, and it's very clear what comes next, right? And I think that this is something a powerful idea about the human condition as well, because predictability is something which is extremely negative in its impact on ourselves, and we can experience on again in the psychological sense and so on. And people can relate to this in many ways. If you live a predictable life in or the areas where your life is very predictable, you are much less likely to feel the vitality, to feel the energy, to feel the satisfaction, the meaning. If you go to the same office for 30 years, you meet the same people, you can do something extremely interesting. I was a former prosecutor. I think it's one of the most interesting and satisfying jobs. And yet, once things are becoming predictable, they're losing their value. And if we want actually to take something practical from this, then we may conclude that if you want to live a life of meaning, you should be aware of this aspect and to avoid predictability as much as possible. This is not easy. Marriage is about predictability, family life, a job, a stable job, and all those things are correlated with predictability, but they are extremely harmful to this sense of vitality, this sense of meaning. And what is your take on this?
Wow, that struck because I feel like a lot of people, including myself, take comfort in predictability. I mean, for example, I'm not actually sure what percentage of the world would consider themselves religious, but if you do consider yourself religious, you probably take great comfort in the predictability that every Sunday you do this, or every X holiday you do that, and that no matter where you travel to in the world, when you go to X religious house, you will find this and meet this kind of religious leader. And that predictability gives great comfort, similar to the events that you have in your life. And even in the opposite extreme, you can think of individuals who are in abusive relationships, and they might even know consciously that to get out they would find greater meaning. They would be safer. They would, but it's unpredictable. And sometimes it's very hard to leave situations, even that are bad for you, because you find comfort in the predictability. And I think even if you're, even sort of those are two extremes, and then in the middle of the day to day life of, I know I get up at this time, I know I go to that job. I think that it is sort of counterintuitive to say that you would not be able to extract meaning from predictability. I don't know that that would sit with a lot of individuals. And I think that even if it did, if you are constantly revitalizing your life, if you're constantly changing things up, moving, taking new jobs, finding new friends, or whatever mixes up your life, I think that the change does not equate to meaning. Same with Frankel. Frankel was in the same horrible situation for I don't know how long it was, but it wasn't in the change that he found meaning. It was in the present moment. And so I think in the same way, on a more positive side, you can extract meaning, but again, it's a choice from predictability if that's the situation that you're in.
Well, I agree with you that there's a tension between predictability and comfort and stability and the feeling of routine. These are all things. Some of them contradict one another, and maybe it's a personal thing, and different people would react to this differently. But I think that when we actually look at the myth or we observe the myth, this is one of the things, whether we're conscious or not about it, that makes us feel so. That we react so negatively to the condition of Sisyphus because the predictability is such a major part of it. And another thing that we can maybe take from this is that we can bear difficulties, challenges, and so on, as long as we feel that we have the authorship of them. But when they are being forced on us, when we don't have a say over them, then things are becoming much more difficult. So it's not about the challenge itself. It's about who is the one who and what is the thing to bring about to initiate the difficulty. If you have a say in it, if you are invested psychologically, emotionally, then you can bear the struggle. If not, then it can be unbearable. And that is also something that one can take for his own life. We can observe the kind of life that we're living on different dimensions. It can be career, family, whatever that would be, and ask ourselves to what degree we have this authorship on those conditions, on those circumstances. If we don't, then we may not be surprised that there is a correlation between the fact that we're not, and the amount of happiness, satisfaction that we feel. Sisyphus had no say. Sisyphus was forced to go through the struggle and challenges and difficulties that he was going through. And this a major factor in what made him an ultimate example of misery and suffering.
Yeah, and that's very Nietzschean, right? To sort of take authorship, to reinterpret a condition that you are not necessarily confined to or sentenced to, because it's our lives. It's not a myth. We don't live in myth. But if it becomes our will to do it, so taking it back to the myth, if it was Sisyphus's will to stand at that top and say, change the narrative in his own mind to say, I am going to will this rock back down the hill. I'm going to will these legs of mine back down the hill, and I'm going to push it back up again, and I'm going to keep that pattern going for the rest of eternity. In that sense, he has shifted his mindset from one of being out of control to being in control. That's something that Nietzsche would say is a way of extracting control and meaning through strength and through one's own sense of will. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
To some degree, but I also wanted again we're breaking down this myth to all sorts of possible areas where we can analyze, understand, and find the correlation to our own lives. A major factor of this myth is that idea that reaching something doesn't necessarily or doesn't change much. It doesn't change much at the end of the day. And there's a question there to what degree this actually fit our own lives, because we have challenges, we have ambitions, we're aiming for them. Sometimes they are short, while the struggle or the path is short. Sometimes it's much longer. If we're fortunate enough, then we eventually succeed in reaching them. But what many people experience is that once they do, it becomes very often either irrelevant or, for the very least, not as powerful as we hoped that it would be. And immediately there's a vacuum that needs to be fulfilled again by another aim, another challenge, another destination. Only to discover again that when we reach this destination again, it seems like it doesn't carry the meaning that we were hoping for. And and let me ask you, to what degree in your life you can identify with this?
Well, you're making me think about a few different key moments in the mythical story of, in terms of the relative importance of, you know, the moments, the minutes, the hours, whatever it takes to be pushing that boulder up the hill. Is the meaning extracted in the pushing, or is it in the seeing that you've done it or at least gotten really close? So I think that that's sort of interesting. Like, I think we've talked before about things that are meaningful in our lives, goals that we've set. You've mentioned, I think, in our first episode about marathon running or physical challenges, and to some extent, the meaning and the the enjoyment, the hard work as well, is very much in the process, not so much in the goal. And these are for, that's in a positive example, of course, the hard work that goes into a physical feat like a marathon, for example. You're pushing, and the all the band-aids and all the creams and the equipment and all the things that you need to get through the process. And it's almost as if the end result of actually running the race is the easiest part, right? So to that extent, I would say that I guess sort of answering my own question, I would derive the most meaning from the process versus seeing it come to fruition. Because to your point, and to the point of the actual myth, sometimes you don't get there anyway, right? And then the rock falls back down the hill, and you either have to start again, or as you suggested, maybe it's just not so important anymore, and you got to find a new rock. But I think that if you miss the meaning in the pushing, you're missing most of it.
But do you think there are categorical destinations that are different than others in the sense that when you achieve them, when you get there, they are long lasting. They don't fade. They don't disappear just like this rock that keeps on falling down again and again.
Yeah, sure. I think so. I mean, I went back to school as an adult to get a master's degree. I worked really hard to get there. It took me 3 years. I have young kids at home.
But how do you feel about the fact that you have a master now? You know, the day
Exactly.
you got your master was a very, exciting
Yeah.
day. You felt fulfillment and you felt satisfaction and maybe pride. But does any of this remain now, years afterwards?
Absolutely. Yes. No, absolutely. That's my point, that I'm trying to think of other areas of life that maybe disprove that or offer a different dimension. So I derived an incredible amount of meaning from the process. I did something that I didn't know I was capable of doing. I had young kids at home. We were in the pandemic. I was waking up very early in the morning and staying up late at night on many occasions because I wanted to do something for myself and study something that I knew I was interested in but didn't have formal education around. And I got a lot of I built confidence, and I just extracted a lot from every class that I took. And it's very much not been the rock that falls back down the hill. I have no desire at the moment to get a master's in something else, for example. I'm using it. It's very much the rock at the top of the hill that I'm very happy to show people and to use and to decorate, or whatever however you want to finish the metaphor. But and that again, I think what it does prove is my earlier point that the meaning has to be in the process as well. Because I don't know that I would get as much from the ultimate reward of graduation if I didn't really hold on to every moment in all of my classes. But I did, and now I'm really enjoying it.
Are there any criteria that you can identify of things, of tasks, of challenges in life, again, on a categorical level, that are of the kind of the lasting ones, like the rock that stays on top? as opposed to or versus other categories where things that you aiming for, you achieving, but only to see the rock falling down and to be left with this vacuum that needs to be fulfilled again, climbing, pushing the rock again up a hill.
I mean, again, education is probably the best example that I can think of a rock that you push up and that it stays and that you're happy for that. I think another example might be your health. I think you actually probably could argue it multiple ways because for a lot of people, and I certainly identify with this, building towards good health is a process and a process that you can and should extract meaning from. And there also isn't necessarily an end goal as there is in education. It's more finite. You have a graduation day. You don't. Your doctor doesn't tell you one day that congratulations, you're in perfect health. You're done. You can go back to eating Kit Kats or whatever your poison is. Um, so in that sense, it's actually sort of a third category of a boulder that you push up that never reaches the top of the hill, perhaps, and you better like the process because your boulder will get higher as you become healthier through exercise, through better eating, through supplements, whatever the case is. But it's a never ending journey, right? You got to keep going, especially as your body ages and your needs change. You have to be doing different things. So it's a dynamic process, right? So, in that sense, that might be an example of a rock that just keeps going up. So, again, that's the third example of why you must extract meaning from the process. What would you
Which
say about
obviously brings
that?
us to the beginning of the conversation,
Yeah.
to what degree we actually have control over our own attitude. Is
Yeah.
it given, or we have room there to actually to impact our own attitude?
Mm.
As we're getting closer to the end, maybe we can end up with something more optimistic regarding this myth. Um, people, and I would like to get your thought on this. People often consider, and we had a full opposite episode on this, death to be evil, right? To be a very bad thing, tragic thing, not just as a loss of someone close to, which is obvious, but also the death of the self.
Mm.
Now, what we may take from Sisyphus is that while we mourn death, in fact, this is the opposite than a punishment, because if there was no death, if we lived internally, there was no other way but to end up like Sisyphus. And if that is the case, then living eternal life would actually mean the worst punishment that humans can actually experience. Because I remind you, the whole idea of Sisyphus is you mentioned this at the beginning, he was very intelligent, but he was also very manipulative and he manipulated the gods. And they punished him different ways, different stages. Every time they punished him in a certain way, he manipulated them. And then they gathered and they decided to punish him in the most severe punishment that they could think of, that they could come up with. And the Sisyphus condition is actually this kind of punishment, right?
Mm.
Of internally keeping pushing the rocks. And I think that there's a lot into it because if death did not exist, we would live in these internal circles. And these internal circles maybe are the worst punishment that we can actually imagine. And therefore, this is where I'm actually getting in the optimistic interpretation of the myth,
Finally.
is that death is actually a good thing.
Yeah. Well,
Good
I
thing.
think there's a distinction to be made, though, between the finality of death and regularity or predictability, as we said earlier. I think those are different things. Yes, he is condemned eternally, but he is condemned eternally to do something predictable with regularity. And I think we talked about an earlier episode, the last episode about death, that death almost paradoxically brings value to life because your time is short and that's why ethics matter in relationships in your life and thinking and it matters because it will end. But the predictability of it, I think, is a little bit different. I think that is more torturous of an idea than the end of it all. But I think there's a distinction to be made.
Okay, well, as always, it was great to have this conversation.
Very uplifting.
I'm
No
already
pun
looking
intended.
forward to the next conversation, probably in a week from now, on our next philosophical topic.
Sounds great. Look forward to it.